Welcome to Diasporaa, the show where we share the remarkable stories of immigrants from the Indian subcontinent. I'm your host, Aditya Mehta. Each week, we sit down with individuals who have made the journey over and explore their experiences, their triumphs, their challenges. We delve into their unique perspectives on adapting to a new culture while staying connected to their roots. Today, we're joined by Ranil Herath, a senior executive in the education sector, based in Seattle. He's originally from a city called Kandy in Sri Lanka, and that's Kandy with a K. He grew up between Kandy and the UK and then went to school in New Delhi in India, and eventually moved to Toronto and then Calgary and now in Seattle. He's been president of multiple educational institutions in Canada. Currently, he's the chief revenue officer at Shorelight, a company that helps international students study in the US. He's also on the steering committee of the Washington State Opportunity Scholarship, and the board of the Rainier Club, which is where we met, and that's how I know him. And in his spare time, I wonder how you have any left after all this. He has also invested in startups as an angel investor. So as you can tell, he's done a lot of interesting work, and we'll go deeper into in a little bit. So now let's dive into this week's conversation. Ranil, welcome to the show, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
I always ask this to my guests to start with. If Kandy were an American city, what city would it be?
I think it'll be like Aspen or, something like an Aspen.
So it would be like a mountain town, not too large. Most Indians know Kandy because there's a cricket stadium there. And I don't think most people know that it's a very unique stadium. If you want to tell us what makes that stadium unique.
Sure, this is Askiria Stadium, International Test Stadium, and my high school, Trinity College in Kandy, is the one who built it. So it was my high school stadium, which became the International Test Stadium. And I think we were probably the only high school in the world that had an international
Cricket
test venue.
stadium.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any famous cricketers that come from there?
From the school, yes. Kumar Sangakkara, who grew up as a neighbor. His brother was my classmate. So somebody I knew growing up.
Yeah. My wife, where she lives in Bombay, Rohit Sharma is from that building. And Rohit Sharma is famous Indian cricketer. And that's always a topic of discussion with my father-in-law who still lives in that building. That's good to know. We'll go back into the India, Sri Lanka and cricket in a little bit because that otherwise we'll end the whole episode just talking about that. So what was it like growing up in Kandy and in Sri Lanka and also your little stint in the UK?
Kandy is a cool place to grow up. It's a small town. And it was during the colonial time, during the British time, that was the city town of all the plantations. So that's where people would come down to. So the schools were built for the tea planters' kids. And so there's a good school system. Kandy also is the last kingdom of Sri Lanka. So a lot of history. And growing up was fantastic. Going to school there, small town, good people that you grew up with, but a fun town.
Yeah. How far is it from Colombo?
It's only about 72 miles, but it would take 3 hours to go there up the hill.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. You went to school in New Delhi in India. Is it common for people in Sri Lanka to come to India for education? Because as Indians, I don't think we're aware if there are any international students in India, and if so, how many? So is it a common thing?
Some go there. The usual destinations that Indians go is the same for Sri Lanka. Most go to Australia and UK. Some come to the US. India, when I went, there were probably about 100 students at Delhi University across its various campuses. Next year, there was 150. And the year after that, there was over 200 who came. So it was growing when I was there. And there were students also from Mauritius. There were students from a couple of African countries as international students in Delhi University.
Yeah. There's a lot of Nigerian students in Mumbai, and they all live in this area called Mira Road, and they have a Nigerian church there.
Wow.
And it's right next to a McDonald's. So if you're driving by on a Sunday morning, in this random McDonald's, you'll see a whole bunch of very well-dressed African people right out of church. And if you don't know the context behind it, you'll be like, it's very out of place to just see a big group of African people dressed up in suits eating at a McDonald's in a suburb, right? So that's interesting. I think until recently, most Indians don't know the soft power that the country has. People routinely get surprised when they meet someone from Africa who's watched Bollywood movies. And you're like, oh, we didn't know that was a thing. But now I think more Indian people are getting acquainted with that. Did you have a chance to, or did you need to pick up any Hindi at all? Or was it fine? I suppose you speak Sinhala.
Yeah.
So was Hindi ever, you felt the need to learn it, or English just sufficed?
When I was in India, I think it was important to learn a few words.
Sure.
I wasn't too keen to learn, but eventually I learned a little bit. I could get by, like, buy stuff or take a taxi, get directions a little bit. Or the other important thing is if you call somewhere, we didn't have cell phones then, you have to tell whoever answers the phone to leave a message, and they wouldn't speak English usually.
Yeah, before cell phones, sometimes one person in the neighborhood would have a phone. And you would call them and you say, go call so-and-so from this other house.
Yes.
And then they would do that. And then, I remember those days. Back when my parents were growing up, the wait to get a landline was 10 years. And now I can't even imagine it, because we have the most cell phones of any country in the world and the cheapest data and the most digital transactions. And to go from 10 years to like, I can have a phone delivered to me in 10 minutes, it's quite a transformation. Were you in India when Sri Lanka won the Cricket World Cup in 1996?
Yeah, that's right. I think 96 or 97. I was studying in Delhi and remember that day really well, because that was the first time Sri Lanka ever won the World Cup. And we were watching this from the rooftop of somewhere Sri Lankans live. So it was a big party. We were watching. We kind of had hopes we will win, and we did. And after we won the match, we were wondering, what are we going to do now? And somebody had this brilliant idea saying, what else? We have to go to the Sri Lankan embassy. And we all thought this was like a fantastic idea. This was obviously a night match. So this was past midnight.
Yeah.
And we all got into dry shows, taxis, whatever we could find, and made our way to Chanakyapuri to the Sri Lankan embassy. And they actually let us in, and there was a party happening at the Deputy High Commissioner's residence inside the embassy complex. So we were welcomed, and there was food, there were drinks, and some more drinks, and that was a night to remember.
Amazing. Semi-final between India and Sri Lanka in Eden Gardens. People of my generation consider it to be one of the worst times of Indian cricket, because in our culture, there's a saying, Atithi Devo Bhava, which means the guest is God. And we're known for being hospitable people. And when visiting teams come, like when Pakistan comes to India, right, there's huge hospitalities. There's not animosity except for a few sections of society. But so I consider, as a cricket fan, that was not good behavior by the team, throwing stuff on the field and whatnot. Because cricket's a gentleman's game. So the audience is a gentleman, the players are gentlemen or gentlewomen. So yeah, that match is etched into, I think, pretty much everybody's memory. And then we beat Australia in the final. I think by that time, the whole world was rooting for Sri Lanka and not Australia, because being the underdog. But Australia had only won the World Cup once up till then, I believe, in 1987. So they hadn't started their supremacy yet. But I think people still definitely supported Sri Lanka and India, at least from what I remember. So after studying in Delhi, actually before that, in Delhi, because you look like an Indian person, all the South Asians look very similar. When people found out you're not Indian, what was their usual reaction? Was it curiosity or something else?
There was curiosity, and they were trying to see how I would fit in the Indian context. So some people would ask, so what's your caste? Some people would ask, so what's it like comparatively?
Yeah.
So they were trying to peg you to something equivalent to India.
Sure.
That was one. And the other one usually is they really didn't know, most Indians didn't really know Sri Lanka that much. And when they learned about it, they get a little surprised. But that was generally the reaction.
I remember seeing less inequality in Sri Lanka than I did in India. The extreme rich and extreme poor, which India has. And disclaimer, I've been there a very long time ago. But I saw it as a more prosperous on average and less inequality. But otherwise, it felt a lot like India. There was Indian Oil, Lanka, petrol pump. Like, there were a lot of brands that we see in India. They're like Tata automobiles and stuff like that. So it was an interesting experience, because India is a country which is, you could call it a tough neighborhood. We don't drive over to our neighbors, right? You can't drive into Pakistan. You can't drive into China. So most people are not as familiar with the immediate neighborhood as they are with Dubai or Bangkok or Singapore. I think that's where this stems from. But I do see more flights to Colombo now from more cities than there used to be. you would have to go through Chennai always. And now it's like there's so many options from so many towns. So I think that connectivity can only be good for the two countries. Okay, so back to what I was going to ask. So after coming back, what did you do? You came back to Sri Lanka after the degree. What was your first job or assignment?
Yeah, so I actually worked in pharmaceuticals before going for my degree. After high school, I was a medical rep for a couple of years. When I came back, I didn't want to get back into the same industry. I was looking at what, and then tech was booming. This is in the run up to Y2K. And so I joined one of the larger tech companies as a corporate account manager to do tech sales. So that was my first job back from India into Colombo, and then that's what I did.
Okay. And what made you transition to education as an industry?
Yeah, so it wasn't kind of a thought out that I'll go into that industry. So I worked in tech, then in telco, mostly in sales and marketing. And this tech company that I worked for before, which is part of a large conglomerate, they had a software development arm, which found it difficult to find enough developers because they were getting a lot of foreign software development deals in Middle East and Asia and America.
Yeah.
So they thought it'll be a great idea to do a backward integration and set up a tech school.
Okay.
And the school was set up by the same parent company of the software development company. And I joined them as head of sales and marketing. So it kind of going back to the tech company, but one of their subsidiaries, which happened to be in education.
How's the corporate work culture in Sri Lanka? Because India is a sea apart from the US. Is it similar to the US, or are there any local nuances that play into that?
Some local nuances, but most of the brands are obviously everything to Sri Lanka. Most of the tech, almost everything is imported.
Sure.
So the culture is a kind of a nice blend. But the entire corporate culture operates, functions, communicates in English. So that's helpful. You will not be speaking the local language for any work-related thing, for any of the businesses.
So if you're making a presentation, it's in English.
Everything,
if you're writing a document.
Email, it's in English. Conversations in the hallway will be in English.
That's interesting. In India, I think Hindi was common in the workplace, but then again, it's such a place where you can't speak for the whole country because the experience in Chennai would be very different from than Bombay. We were in Bombay, so we would try to export our corporate culture to all the other cities. And once you get out of the top 3 or 4 cities, it would dilute pretty quickly. And my family business was in 450 cities of India.
Wow.
We had financial franchisees. And the kind of corporate behavior you expect in Bombay, you can't in smaller towns. And we were in the smallest of towns, like in Baramulla in Kashmir, close to where the Kargil war was fought. So we were in towns like that and can't really expect any corporatized behavior from any or professionalism. So that's interesting. Are there like flagship engineering colleges in Sri Lanka that everyone wants to get into? Like in India, we have the IITs.
There are, yeah. So there are a couple of ones, including University of Moratuwa, which produces some of the best tech graduates. There are several private colleges as well as universities.
Okay. Is it a hangover of the British system like we have in India?
Pretty much, yeah. So you'd see more of a British influence in where you drive, where you speak, social class structure and everything. It's the British hangover.
Okay. Got it. So when you transition to education, like you said, was within the tech company, then what prompted you to move out of Sri Lanka? Were you in that position a long time before you decided to move out?
No, I think if I were to back up, when I graduated from college in Delhi and when I came back to Sri Lanka, at that time, even though my friends were immigrating and going overseas to study, I had no interest in leaving Sri Lanka. I was very happy. I was doing well in the corporate setting. I was head of sales and marketing for one of the best companies in the country and kind of doing really well for a 20-some-year-old kid. But we also had a civil war going on while everything was fine in Colombo. And this was on a Sunday. We were talking, some of the friends were meeting for lunch. We were talking about playing this out. And it dawned on me it might be a good idea for me to experience something else and maybe then come back. And we were discussing options. Where would you go? Canada, Australia, UK. And the following Monday, the next day, I actually went to this is when all the paper applications were there for immigration. Went to the Canadian High Commission and the Australian High Commission, picked up the immigration papers, came home, sat on it for a week. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to go to Canada because it's close proximity to the US and it's a bigger economy. So that's how I made that decision.
Yeah. In India, the craze was Australia, New Zealand, Canada, because US has been harder to get into per se. And for me, that was exactly the reason I liked Canada, because it's right next to the biggest economy in the world. Australia is smaller than Canada. And like I say, New Zealand is Australia's Canada. They're smaller next to a smaller country. So that makes sense. Was the express entry program a thing back then?
It wasn't express entry, but one other thing on Australia. So I forget the umpire's name. There was this guy no-balling Murali.
The one who had the twisted finger?
The Daryl Hare or somebody? No.
Daryl Hare? I know.
You know the umpire, right?
I know the umpire.
Yeah.
I can't. Yeah. The name will come to me.
So he was no-balling Murali on, and Murali is another guy from Kandy.
Oh yeah,
he's from Kandy too, and he studied at the school my dad studied at.
Okay.
And so the joke is, I also didn't pick Australia because they were no-balling Murali.
I mean, from our part of the world, that's a legitimate reason.
Yeah,
of course. So, for more context for our listeners, Muralidharan is one of the great spin bowlers. A bowler is a pitcher. Spin bowlers of like the world of cricket. Very feared and extreme amount of spin. He, along with people like Anil Kumble or Shane Warne, were like considered the greatest spin bowlers of all time. And what happens is the ball hits the ground and then goes in a different direction. So it's very hard to hit that. He was a leg spinner or off spinner? I also don't remember. We're getting old. Okay, so that's a good reason for not choosing Australia. Well, let's take a break now. When we return, we'll talk about Ranil's early days in Canada and his time there, and then what led him to move to the US. Be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Diasporaa on KKNW, where we share interesting stories of first-generation immigrants from South Asia. We are talking to Ranil Herath, a senior executive in education, angel investor, and all-round interesting person. So we were talking about the decision to move to Canada. And how long did that process take once you decided? And then how long did it take for you to move once you got approved?
Once I applied, I think it took about just over a year and a half to get the approval. At that time, I was just wrapping up my MBA in Colombo. I waited to finish it, and after I graduated, I moved to Canada.
Yeah, my regular listeners will know this, but it was one of those things where the universe conspired for me. We went from deciding to apply right after being rejected for a US visa, because then I had all the documents, to getting the approval email in 3 weeks flat. And this was before the whole wave of people started moving. So this was 2017, late 2017. And we couldn't believe how quickly it had happened. So now, of course, it takes a similar amount of time, possibly longer because of a COVID backlog that they have. So, okay. What were your first impressions of landing in Toronto?
I love Toronto. I still love Toronto. Landing in Toronto, I didn't have any contacts except my wife's uncle was there, so I stayed with him. And before coming, I was reaching out to people in the education industry, just getting acquainted with people,
Sure.
trying to make connections. So my first year was really trying to connect with the community in Canada, not with just the Sri Lankan community who lived in Toronto.
Okay. There was a saying back in the day when Indians would land without any support. They would open up the phone directory that's available in a phone booth and just look for last name Patel. And it's a common surname. They're business people. And you could just call up any Patel and they would let you into their house because you were a fellow Indian or fellow Gujarati. Were you married when you landed there, or that was subsequent?
That was subsequent. So I was engaged to my wife. You met Anna,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So we were engaged. We were set to get married when I got the immigration, and I.
Okay, got it. So yeah, it was basically a move together. Was it hard to get the first job once you landed?
It was very difficult. I would apply to everything just to get experience, talking to people,
Yeah.
just getting the culture and how things go. I remember this one interview that I got called in for. That was to sell newspapers, the Toronto Eaton Centre. So standing in the mall and sell newspaper subscriptions, not to sell newspapers. So I won't do anything. And I got a call asking me to come to an address in Yonge Street, which is the main
Yeah.
street downtown Toronto. So I go there, and there's like maybe 30 people. And 5, 6, 10, 30 minutes later, somebody comes out and says, all right, we have shortlisted 10 people to interview. We are not going to interview all of you. So I wasn't one of the people shortlisted.
Wow.
So I left. And
Yeah.
I was kind of laughing as well because, okay, well, maybe it's a good thing I didn't get picked to sell
Sure.
newspaper subscriptions in the Eaton Center.
Yeah, there's a distinct term in Canada called the survival job. And that's the job you do until you get the job you are actually qualified for. And if you're a doctor, you may never get that job that you're qualified for. If you're a marketer or a banker, it might come sooner. My wife and I were very clear when we landed. We're here to enjoy the quality of life. We're not here as economic migrants. We have cash reserves. We're not going to go to any job, the first job we get. We're going to be a little more strategic about it. And our first friend group in Canada was people who had been there for a long time. Because otherwise, as a new immigrant, you tend to meet other new immigrants. And then you're all in that same group think. So for us, that group was very helpful. And it opened up our horizons to doing all sorts of different things that we were doing in India anyways as long-time residents of Bombay. So what was the first job then that you got?
Yeah, so the first job had the same thing, tried different things for experience, but the first job I wanted to get into a professional job. And I got a director role at a college in
Nice.
Toronto. And similar to what you said in the community, I very purposely wanted to connect with the Toronto general community.
Yeah.
So I became a member of the Toronto Rotary Club. I'm still friends with the folks there. Member of several professional organizations in management, marketing. So my time was really spent networking, not within the community, even though I went for all of the Sri Lankan stuff.
Sure.
But my time was really spent connecting to Toronto, and those connections are still there.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. We became members of the local Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. I joined some startup accelerators as an advisor, and I was on a non-profit advisory board called Anxiety Canada. It's the biggest mental health charity in Canada, and the London Business School community. And that was, I think, literally the single most important decision we took is not to do the survival job. Did you get asked, where's your Canadian experience?
Yeah, they did keep asking that, and I didn't really have a good answer for that.
Yeah. I once told someone that I launched an app which was acquired in its second year and had thousands of users. And they were like, but was it a Canadian app? And I said, like, how is that relevant? I've done things at scale. But it was sadly something that people put a lot of emphasis on. And it's one thing if you're an immigrant out cold, never lived abroad, never been anywhere, landing straight into Canada. And someone like you and me who've seen the world, been around, like I knew how to drive in Canada on the other side of the road, but there's not enough differentiation that, oh, you're someone who's already been through the grind, who's been educated outside, so you do know more about Canadian culture than the average person. So those challenges were definitely there. What prompted the move from Toronto to Calgary then?
Yeah, so I was president of a small private college in Toronto, and that was owned by a U.S. school college system. And then another college system, a large publicly traded company in the U.S., had a 4-year college in Canada. So they were looking for a new president who can kind of turn around. The school has not been doing good for enrollment and revenue for a number of years, and they were looking for a turnaround president.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate to be picked to do that job.
Wow.
And I was the youngest president of a 4-year college in Calgary, in Alberta, in Canada at that time.
Wow.
So I moved for that job.
Did you like Calgary after spending time in Toronto, which is big multicultural global city?
Calgary was a really good surprise in terms of quality of living. Calgary has this kind of impression that it's redneck and the West, and it's none of that. It's actually probably more white-collar downtown Calgary than Toronto, the way I remember it. It's a very tight community. It's a extremely well-connected, a very warm community. Certainly less diverse and less eclectic than Toronto. But in Calgary, as going there also helped as you go there as president of a college,
Yeah.
And
You plug into a high quality network right away.
yeah, right away. Like, you're talking to the mayor, you're talking to the governor or the premier in that
Yeah.
case, and you are at the equivalent of the Rainier Club, which was called the Ranchman's Club,
Okay.
as well as the Petroleum Club and the Rotary Club. So I was like very plugged into the community. I know I don't know if you heard of the Calgary Stampede.
Yeah, of course.
So for the Stampede, people throw barbecues. And
Yeah.
that's the thing, the whole week, 10 days of Stampede, we hosted the campus barbecue that I hosted. 2,000 people, including the mayor, the premier, and
Right.
presidents of other colleges in that period. But Calgary was fantastic.
Talk a little bit more about the Stampede for our listeners for more context.
Yeah, sure. So the Stampede is a week of what you call a rodeo and chuck wagon races to the entire city gets into the spirit of Stampede. So you'll have bales of hay everywhere. Everybody in Calgary will be in jeans, cowboy boots, cowboy hats that entire 10 days, be it investment bank or the governor's office or the premier, as you would call it, or the mayor's office. Everybody is in Western gear, and all corporates put up some form of barbecue or a party, and the Stampede grounds would host, it's like a big fair with chuck wagon races, rodeo, all of these things. It's probably one of the biggest rodeos in the world during that
I believe
time.
it.
Yeah.
I see a common theme between what you said about Calgary and what one of my previous guests, Shashank, said about Northern Ontario, where he moved. He said the colder the place, the warmer the people.
That's a good.
So it seems to be the same with Calgary. I've been a few times, mostly for work when I worked at Amazon, so I wouldn't get to experience downtown because I would be going to warehouses around the outskirts of the city. But then Banff is obviously one of the prettiest places in the world, in my opinion. I've been a couple of times, and Banff actually feels very international. I don't know if you've been to Whistler in Vancouver. I feel like it's even more international than that. So, how long were you in Calgary for?
Close to 5 years.
Okay. And then what prompted the move over to Seattle?
So the same company who owned that college, it's a publicly traded US company, they wanted me to move to their headquarters to open up an international division.
Okay.
Moved me, it's a corporate move.
Yeah. One thing that keeps coming back to me about what you said about Canada, the immigration experience is not so much determined by where you're going and how different you are from everybody else there. It seems like who you're plugging into is really the key, because the experience of first time immigrant never left the country coming to Calgary, and there's YouTube channels dedicated to how miserable life in Canada is for these immigrants, versus when you go with already a job and that comes with its connections. It's what in Hindi we call zameen asman ka farak. It's ground and sky, completely different experience altogether. Were you doing the same thing in Toronto in terms of plugging into these diverse networks?
Yes, and one thing that's really important that I learned, and this was a very purposeful move, while your community that's from your country could be a very good support network, most people spend all of their time with that community. And with that, you learn, and the advice you get is limited to their shared experience,
100%.
where you don't then get to carve a path for yourself. So my advice came from people outside of the community. I would have food, enjoy conversations about what happened back home and your high school and your city. But from a professional perspective, I plugged into the professional associations, the social networks that was more mainstream as opposed to being stuck in your community. I think that's the big differentiator.
So when we landed in Vancouver, we didn't go to Surrey, which is the Indian neighborhood or city. We went to downtown, and when we would interact with other Indian people there, they thought we were living in downtown and paying this high rent because we didn't know Surrey existed. And they're like, oh, but there's a cheaper option. And we're like, yeah, but we don't want that cheaper option because we want to be able to plug into Surrey when we want to, but experience the downtown life and the multiculturalism that comes with it. So that's a great point.
Same thing, one of my close friends said, hey, you're crazy. Why are you renting an apartment downtown? It's like right downtown. Said, hey, I could get for the fraction of that I could get somebody's basement room in a basement or like a shared room.
The
I'm like,
basement
no, I
suites.
didn't come here for that, man. Like,
Yeah.
I need to do my
Yeah.
own thing, and I'm going to experience Toronto as a Canadian.
But those people would think we were arrogant when we said that I didn't come respectfully, I didn't come to Canada to live in a basement. They found that being arrogant. We very quickly realized that we didn't relate to the average immigrant experience of Vancouver. Sometimes I feel that they don't even experience Canada. They're still experiencing what they experience back home, but just in a different country.
Yeah, then why leave?
And why leave?
You should stay back and have that experience.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Living in Canada and living in US, what's better about each country?
Sure. Canada is a country that has a lot of processes, policies. Immigration system, I think, is pretty tight, but has a very clear path to get in and become a citizen, which is not the case in the US. However, the mobility upward in the corporate world is easier in the US with merit. If you have the merit, if you do a good job, nobody cares whether you have American experience or not. Nobody ever asks that. It's about merit and mobility. Whereas in Canada, there is always this ceiling at every level. There is a ceiling you have to break through just because you're not originally from Canada. So it's easy to get into, very hard to go upward, especially above, get to a C-suite. To be in an executive position is really hard, which is not the case here. Here you prove yourself, you move really fast.
Yeah. I've made this point on my show before, so I'll keep it brief, but there are countries like Canada where it's harder to get in, but then you have a path to citizenship. There's countries like the UAE where everybody gets in, but there's no path to citizenship. The US is in this weird spot where it's hard to get in and it's hard to naturalize. And my listeners have heard me say a couple of times, like the green card wait for Indians in the main category is about 90 years. So I haven't even bothered applying because what's the point? So my son will live as a dependent on my visa, then have a student visa, then a work visa, and then maybe when he's in his mid to late 20s, he might naturalize, if at all. So it's just unfortunate because everybody in the world wants to be in the US, and it's just made a little bit harder than it should be. In a previous episode, we talked about the O1 visa for my cousin who's Harvard, MIT, and he says that every step I have to keep proving again and again that I'm going to be an asset to this country. And he's like, it should be okay to prove once because getting into Harvard is tough enough. That already proves. So yeah, that's what the case is. So I like that analogy with the corporate ceiling because you're right. Nobody ever asks us in the US, do you have any US experience or not? Was it hard to relate to the majority of South Asians here? Because the common path is to come for a master's degree, stick around, work in an engineering firm in Amazon, Microsoft. And you didn't have that. You came later in life and you came with a strong background and a job in hand, as did I. And we just could not relate to most people here because their path and the shared experience was so different. So did you experience something similar?
Yeah, it's similar. And so most of my network here is like I bumped into you accidentally, not because we are from South Asia.
Of course.
Through the Rainier Club. So the people and the network I build is not based on who I am. I think it's based on what we are experiencing today. So we are experiencing the Rainier Club, so we meet. And you happen to be from South Asia. Let's say I'm doing some work for Harvard or my company or in a company that I've invested in. Then we are meeting because of that. Then you have common interest and maybe somebody happens to be from where you are.
Yeah.
But the reason you meet is not because of that.
I love that. Let's take a short break now. When we return, we'll talk about what Ranil is currently doing and as well as his advice for other new immigrants. So we'll be back after these messages. Welcome back to Diasporaa on KKNW, where we share interesting stories of first-generation immigrants from the Indian subcontinent. We're talking to Ranil Herath today, and so far we've covered his journey from Sri Lanka to Canada to the US. So tell us about the main thing that keeps you busy, which is your Chief Revenue Officer at Shorelight. So what does Shorelight do and what is kind of mission of the company?
Yeah, so Shorelight's mission is educate the world. Essentially, think of the global mobility of talent. We work with universities in the United States to build programs that support international students have a great U.S. higher education experience.
Yeah.
That's one side of the business. The second part of the business is we have a team across the world that helps prepare students and recruit students to come and study in the U.S.
So you help them to research where they should go, what programs to attend, and then guide them through the whole application process. Do you also help them get like funding or scholarships or anything on those lines?
We have a whole suite of programs to support the students, including funding, health insurance, housing.
Wow.
So we do
Everything.
the academic program as well as a suite of non-academic services that the student needs, including visa prep support to immigration. If you arrive here, you need a lawyer. We also have lawyers standby.
I applied in 2002. We had these random counselors in India. I didn't know at the time that they get commission from the university, and that's primarily driving their decision. Commission is fine, but you have to still do what's best for the student. I applied to 14 or 16 colleges for my undergrad because I didn't know any better. So I'm glad you're giving direction. It's expensive to study in the US. And when you're taking such a big decision, this kind of advice would, I think, go a very long way. Did you get involved in the Washington State Opportunity Scholarship while doing this, or was that an independent thing that happened?
It was independent. It was nothing to do with Showlight. I got introduced to the Washington State Opportunity Scholarship through another Rainier Club member. And I love the work they do. And I support them in any way I can, including recently, thank you for joining me at that table.
Yeah, Ranil was kind enough to invite me to the event. It was nice to take part in contributing to these opportunities and scholarships, but actually interacting with the student on our table who actually benefited from that scholarship. I think that's a very powerful thing when you see actually the impact that it's not just you go online and make a donation. When you actually talk to the person who's benefited from that, it's a different feeling of fulfillment, but also motivator to keep doing this over and over again. Tell me more about the angel investing. How did you become interested in that in the first place, and what kind of companies do you invest in?
Yeah, I got interested based on just exposure to different founders coming up with cool ideas. Sometimes they would get connected for advice based on my background, and it happened to be in education, technology, and healthcare, which are the three areas I have expertise in. So I invest in the space that I know, which is the intersection of those three areas.
Nice.
And for example, one company, they do incredible augmented reality and virtual reality products to help surgeons prepare.
Okay.
Another company, they help foreign trained healthcare professionals and technology professionals come to the US, top up their education, and then go on to be placed for jobs.
Do you ever envision a future where, like how tech services are exported to India, you'll have medical services of consulting patients in places like Canada and US where there tends to be a wait to be exported to countries that have all that talent? Or because of the regulation of the Indian doctor can't just come here and work, will that continue to be a roadblock?
I think it's already happening for those who can afford it to travel.
Right.
What you're asking is technology enabling breaking the distance barrier. I think it can happen. The only thing, there are two things that's preventing it. One is insurance coverage, and two is the licensing for medical practitioners. I think both of those things can be overcome. The barriers are somewhat significant with the trade unions for the nurses and the doctors, as well as the insurance coverage. But I think the barriers are coming down, so I'm optimistic that there is a future there.
Well, tariffs are coming up, even if barriers are going down.
That's true, yes.
Yeah, that's going to play out interestingly. With these angel investments, are you part of one of these VC angel groups, or do you independently go out? Because this is a unique intersection of healthcare, education, and tech.
Yeah, based on my network and the work I do, I have exposure, and organically I have kind of a deal pipeline that comes my way through my network. I am also a limited partner in a VC firm that focuses on seed stage in South Asia. So that's another thing that I do as well.
Wow, interesting. Is the Seattle funding scene pretty lively in general? Because I get the impression it's much quieter than it is in, say, Silicon Valley.
It's quieter. There is a community, but I haven't really plugged into the Seattle community yet. I'm still pretty new, I think.
Okay.
Still haven't plugged in, but my network isn't really, it's kind of geography agnostic. Some of the companies are
Sure.
US, but some are Singapore to South Asia.
Yeah. So you might relate to this since you have a diverse network. I have London Business School, I have the Indian network, I have Canada, the US, I have a Middle East network. Do you actively give time and set aside time to keep this network alive, or it just wears out over time?
It never wears out. It's something I actively do, consistently do. Even if you are busy, every week there's some time for that network. It's something I do for fun. I would do out of interest anyway. It's not. It doesn't feel like work or something that I have to do. It's something I love to do.
Yeah. I set aside time on Friday afternoons to reach out to people. I have a sort of a tracker which pops out an alert when it's been X amount of time since I've spoken to someone. So my friends would always be like, every few months, you just remember to reach out. I said, no, I use technology because it's very hard to otherwise keep up. I also like wishing people on their birthdays. So every morning I have 5-10 minutes set aside just to shoot out a happy birthday message. And that has been so beneficial because then you're talking to people at least once a year, which is not too bad. And it starts off as a positive, non transactional thing, but many good things have come out of those conversations as well. But yeah, I think it takes a lot of work to maintain a good network. You often have to give before receiving, and you have to have an abundance mindset of being that super connector within your network, and then you start reaping those benefits from it. I'm also a member of something called Business Networking International. It's a worldwide organization. It's very small business focused, but they have these chapters all around the world. Seattle might have 15 or 20. Each chapter has only one person or one profession. So there's only one CPA, one attorney, one massage practitioner, one painter, one electrician. And it's a very diverse group of people who you otherwise would not find. It's also a trusted source of partners for your business, but everybody's basically referring business to each other. That's the whole point. And that is what got my networking mojo going the first time when I was in India. I joined a chapter there. And this whole, always have my antenna up. If someone says, oh, I'm looking for this, or I just bought a new home, or any life event, I automatically like, let me know if you need X, because I know a guy. And now it's at a point where most of my friends know I'm very well connected. So they'll always come and say, hey, do you have anybody on network who's this? So now it's become a proactive ask. So great. I want to spend some time talking about the Rainier Club, if you're okay with that. I joined in August. I'm a recent new member. How long have you been a member, and how did you get introduced to it in the first place?
Yeah, so when we were moving to Seattle, one of the things, my wife and I were here looking at neighborhoods, trying to see
Yeah.
where we want to live. And at the same time, I was researching what are the social clubs that I want to belong to. Because in Calgary, we had a great experience with
Yeah.
the Ranchman's Club, and we wanted a similar experience here.
Sure.
So it's through my research that I found the Rainier Club, and then we actually became members a month before we even moved here.
Oh, wow. Nice. I compared a few clubs as well. In India, we have these, from the colonial times, these gymkhanas.
Yes.
So they're like more like social clubs and athletic clubs than professional networking. But I'm suppose you would have them there too in Sri Lanka, right?
Yeah, we have the. I've been to the Bombay Gymkhana Club.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's a Gymkhana in Colombo too.
Yeah.
So those are the old colonial clubs. So
Yeah.
kind of similar to that, I think.
Yeah, it's a status symbol in Bombay. There's places like the Willingdon Club where $200,000 initiation fee. They open up very limited memberships every year. There's the Cricket Club of India. There's a lot of very prestigious ones. So we were members of a couple of them in India, but we use them for social things like the swimming pool and the gym and whatnot. And when I came here, it's just exactly this what we talked about earlier, like having a higher quality network. You're the average of the people you spend the most time with. So I wanted to meet people who were inspiring, who had done amazing things. And I think that objective has really been met. And it's a happy bonus that they have all these great events. The food is amazing. I took a few of my friends there, and they all been in Seattle 15 years or more. And they were blown away by the Weller Bar. They were like, what is this place? Like, we've never heard of it. and we didn't know it existed. And you're this old 100-year-old building in the middle of all these skyscrapers. It is a really good experience. I was like, it's one of the things you have to go look for, because the Rainier Club is not going to do mass advertising saying everybody come join, because it's a small closed community, and that's one of the advantage of it. So let's move on to our weekly segments now. Can we spin the wheel, please? So this first segment is called Sounds and Smells. I think we haven't done this one before. Do you have any particular sounds or smells, good or bad, that instantly you get a flashback of Sri Lanka?
Yeah, the morning mist in certain areas, not in the city, when you are out, is reminiscent of the candy morning mist going to school.
Wow, that's a very unique one. For me, it would be the smell of the dirt right after the first rain, because in Bombay, that's brings that intense summer that we have in our part of the world to an end, and then the sky is clear for maybe 24 hours before it again gets polluted. I think we have time for one more segment, so let's spin that wheel again. Mango memories. Let's see if this transposes from India to Sri Lanka as well. Do you have any memories surrounding mangoes?
Yeah, two. One is growing up, there were 4 mango trees around the house, and each mango tree produced mangoes so vastly different. There was one tree which had mangoes we would hate to eat. It tasted terrible.
So you make pickles out of it then?
We didn't do anything. It was so bad. It was really bad mango.
Yeah.
And the other one was very high fiber. So everything will get stuck in your teeth. It was very high fiber.
I remember those.
That's one. Then the other one was very minimal fiber. We call them the box mangoes. It's literal translation to English. So it's more squarish. It's not square, but like more. And that, again, had better flavor. So those are the mango trees around the house. And the second mango story is there's always a guy outside the school gate. The school I went to, Trinity in Kandy. When you leave, there's a guy who cuts raw mangoes and puts chili powder and salt and sell it to you for a couple of rupees.
Oh, yeah.
So you want to eat that. So that's something, the mango guy outside the school gate.
Yeah, we had that one outside our school too.
You did? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we had, so my school is right next to a place called the August Kranti Maidan, which is a big playing field. That's where the Quit India movement started in 1942. It was launched from there by the Indian National Congress. So our school is smack next to it. It's a Gandhian values school. Now it's become one of these international schools. But so you'd go into this Maidan, huge, 20 different cricket matches going on in parallel, right? So if you're standing at the cover position for your pitch, you're actually in the way of someone else's pitch because it's so close to each other. And then we had 2 rupee pocket money, and we would use that to eat these. That guy's name was Balu. I still remember.
Really?
Yeah, you kind of unlocked a very core childhood memory for me as well. Great. So that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for listening to Diasporaa. We hope you enjoyed hearing Ranil's very interesting story. Remember to check out our show notes for links and more information about the topics that we discussed in today's episode. You can find Diasporaa on all major podcast platforms and can subscribe to our channel on YouTube. If you like this episode, consider following us on Instagram or leaving us a 5-star review. Diasporaa is part of the Staying Power network of shows and podcasts, all of which are dedicated to inspiring listeners to build lives of meaning, connection, and value. You can find the Staying Power network of shows wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back next week with another interesting story from the South Asian diaspora. Until then, take care and stay curious. And Ranil, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.